Hey friends, welcome back to the next video. Now in this video I'd like to introduce to you a very important concept, which is variables in DAX. And I want to show you an example where you can use it. So let's say we'd like to figure out what are actually the sales on the weekdays and what are the sales on the weekends. So how can we do that? Well, we could use, of course, a DAX measure for that. Or let's actually say two DAX measures. The one for the weekday sales, the other one for the weekend sales. So let me right click on a measures table here and say I'd like to create a new measure. So this measure will be simply the total sales. Let's call this total sales on weekends. So on weekends. Okay, is equal to, and of course feel free to name this differently if you want to do that. But now the concept of the variables, which I mentioned. Now in Power BI and in the DAX expressions, you can actually store parts of your formula, of your measure, in a variable. Now in order to do this, what you do is you write the so-called var keyword. So var is a keyword in Power BI, and you'll see this if I now give this variable a name. So let's say I'm using here the weekends, and you see that this weekends is now written in a green color. This is referring to the fact that we are creating a variable here, and this variable is called weekends. So now we can store something in the variable. So we can say the variable itself is equal to, and the great thing in Power BI is that variables can actually store tables as well as values. So that means I can store a number like, for instance, 10,000 inside, or any kind of measure which returns a number using the SUMX function, for instance. But I could also use a function like a table function. Like, for instance, I could use values as a table function, or all, or filter, or anything like that, and store a complete table inside a variable. And I can reuse the variable then later in a different expression inside the same measure. This is important to notice. So let's actually create the weekend variable here and say we would like to filter. And what we would like to filter is the dates table. So dates TBL, this table here. And if you remember correctly, we said that I think in the dates table here, the Monday is a number 0, considering the day of week in this case. So what we could do for the weekends, because weekend then is 5 and 6. So if Monday is 0, then Saturday is 5 and Sunday is 6, if I'm correctly. So let's actually let's first create the measure and then let's check out whether I'm correct. So let's say filter dates table. And in this case, the table itself is a dates table. And the filter expression is simply that the day of week inside the dates table is either Saturday or Sunday. So because it's an OR criteria, we can simply use the OR. So next, of course, here the OR function. And the OR function you're probably familiar with from Excel simply allows us to check logical conditions here. And it is true if only one of them is true. So let's say OR, logical test number 1 is that the day of week, so week, this one here, not the week name, but the week itself, the day of week equals 5. Or the second logical criteria would be that the day of week, let's search for day of week directly, day of week here, this is equal to 6. So if only one of this is true, let me close this, then I want to return the specific row in the dates table. So what this variable weekends now has is it has stored a filter table, so a filtered version of the dates table, only to all the rows where the day of week is 5 or 6. That's all. And one important concept for variables in DAX, when you define them, is you also need to return something. So if you use the var keyword here, you could now specify another variable. So variable number 2, I can say week XYZ, just an example, is equal to, and I can store something else in the next variable. So I can create as many variables as I want. But the point is, after I've created my variables, at the end I need to use the return keyword, because each definition of variable needs to return something. So these are these coming together always in a DAX expression. So let's say return. And what we want to return is we want to iterate over a table. So we can use some x. The table which we want to iterate over is in this case the weekends. Remember, the filter function returns a table. And the table is filtered to weekday of 5 or 6. So that means only the weekends. So I can put in here the variable. So I can refer to weekends. You can see the variable is available for me to use inside my expression. And the variable is pointing to the filter table. And I can say inside the filter table, I want to iterate row by row and evaluate the total sales, for instance, total sales. So that should be it. Total sales, not last year, but total sales, actually this one. So I can close this here and I am good to go. So let's evaluate that first. Let's see how that works and whether it works actually. So let me check that. Okay. So it seems to work fine. So one more time, variable can be defined. A variable can store any kind of expression. So it could be a table expression as we have here, but it also could be a single value, like any kind of number. And then whenever you define variables, you also need to return it. So using the return keyword. So this should be our total sales on weekends. But to make sure that I'm correct with the 5 and 6 in my specific data set, let me just briefly check that. So let me go to the table here and take a look at the dates table selected here. And the day of week. This is basically the column we use in order to filter the dates table. And here I can see that Monday in my case is 0. And I can also see that, for instance, here the 5 or 6, if I go in here and only take a look at the 5 and 6 here, let me just check those two. And then I can see it's Saturday and the 6 would be Sunday in my case. So if I scroll down, is there a Sunday? Yes, there's a Sunday, number 6. So again, it's German dates. I'm sorry for that. But in my case, and you should see that in your data set, that day of week should be mapped to a specific weekday name. And in my case, the 5th and the 6th, the 5 and the 6 are actually mapped to Saturday and Sunday, which are the weekends. So that is correct. Because that means if I just clear the filter for now, and if I go back to my report and take a look at my total sales on weekends, I can see that here, if I filter my dates table to 5 and 6 of the day of week, I get only all the days which have been weekends in my sales data. And then I can return actually the sum of sales based on the weekends. Okay, so I got this one. And now let's actually also evaluate the sales for the weekdays. So let's actually go here, new measure, and we do something kind of similar. So in this case, we use the total sales, and now on weekdays. Weekdays is equal to, and again, going to line, and I will define the variable keyword here, so var, and this time I will specify the weekdays. So not the weekends, but the weekdays. Or working days, depending on how you want to name this, and say it's equal to, and again I will store a filter, so a filter table in this variable, and the filter will be applied on the dates table. So I don't want to return the whole dates table, I want to have a filtered version of it. And the filtered version should now have an expression with the AND function. So you have two options in Power BI to define an AND, either with the ampersand, double ampersand, we have used this in all of the formulas, or there's also an AND function. And the AND function is a logical test, and this time we say the dates TBL, in this case the day of week, so maybe it's easier to search directly for the day of week here. This one should be unequal to 5 or, and unequal to 6. And unequal here is simply opening and closing brackets here. So this means it's unequal to 5, and at the same time, the dates table day of week, so let's search for day of week here, this one should also be unequal to 6. Because these are the two numbers which would be Saturday and Sunday in my case, so I say I want all the dates unequal to 5 and 6, which then is referring of course to only the working days. And then I can close this here and also close the filter function, so we're good to go. And remember, as a practice, we have done this before, but when you use the var keyword, you can use it as many variables as you want in the same expression, but you always at the end need to use return to return something. And for the return, we simply say we want to return the sum x, kind of similar, but this time we are using the weekdays variable which we have created. And here we say we want to give the total sales in here. So total sales, let me just see. I think this is not the wrong one, third one, okay. So let me just use the third one here, total sales. Let me close this here, and then we are good to go. Let me evaluate that, press enter. Okay, and we can see our measure here as well. And then finally, of course, we copy this here. We go to our formatting option, click on new, paste it inside, go to format, have it here for the weekday sales, copy this, go back to my report, and I paste this inside, press enter. So that's it. And also do the same here for this one. So also down here, Control C to copy this, and I go back to my option here, go to, in this case, new, paste this inside, go to format, and then I copy this here as well, like that, and I paste this in total sales on weekends. Press enter, and now it's also formatted. Okay, so we got our measures. Let's quickly check that. Let's take a look at our total sales, and I'm using a multi-row card, like that, and I will also increase the text size under format visuals, just that you can see that better on your screens. So let me just increase the text size here to, let's say, 15. Okay, so we can see here the 1.35 million, what we would expect. Let's actually add now the total sales on weekends, tick this option, and also the total sales on weekdays. Oh, sorry, this is on weekdays. Let's start this weekends. So we can see these are basically 830,000 on the weekdays and 539 on the weekends. And of course, if you sum those up, those two values, then you should derive exactly at the total sales value here. Now, of course, there might be some rounding issue here. This is why this is 07 and 90. But in general, if you sum those two values up, you should get the same as the total sales in here, right? Because you only can sell either on a weekday or on a working day or on a weekend. Okay, so that's basically it. And it looks good. And now, of course, you could also use this in any kind of visualization, right? So if, again, I copy this, Control V to paste it, and instead of having here this as a card visual, I could simply go under the formatting option and choose any other kind of visual. Like, for instance, if I use a bar chart here, in this case, column chart, for instance, I could see then here, I got my total sales, I got the total sales on weekdays or working days, and then here, next, I get the total sales on weekends. And again, this could also be one interesting insight in my dataset. So to figure out, okay, when actually did our customer or did our customers actually order, right? Are we more focused on weekends or weekdays regarding our sales figures? Or, of course, any other kind of measure. Because I know I have a strong emphasis here on my sales figure, because this is something from my dataset. But again, this can be applied at any kind of metric you want to analyze. So that's it actually for the weekday and weekend sales, as well as for a very important concept, because quite helpful, which is the variables index, which we introduced in this specific video, okay? And the most important thing to understand for variables at the beginning is that you can define as many as you want inside a measure, but you always need to return it at the end. You don't need to use it. You could also define a variable here, but never use it in any kind of expression. But you need to be aware, always use a return keyword if you define the variable keyword upfront. And also, one additional thing which you might want to know in advance is if I define a variable here, like weekdays, I can use it inside the total sales on weekday measure, but I cannot use it in a different measure. So I could not say, for instance, in my top 10 clients and refer to the weekday variable, because the weekday variable is measure specific. Variables can only be used in the same measure. They can't be used in any kind of different measure because they are not global. Okay, just to mention that as well. So let me finally double click here and rename this as variables, and weekdays. Okay, like that. Press enter, and then let me just save it, just to make sure that this is saved for you if you want to refer to this in the resource section. And that's it. Okay. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you were able to follow along. And as always, thanks a lot for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.